What do you mean they don't have a hive mind? First Science Officer Zixtal chittered nervously, his antenna twitching in what his species considered the equivalent of raised eyebrows. That's not possible. Every spacefaring species has a hive mind. It's a prerequisite for achieving the technological and social cooperation necessary for interstellar travel. Captain Nurtique made a sound that might have been a sigh if her species had lungs instead of specialized gas exchange membranes. I understand your skepticism, First Science Officer, but our preliminary observations are quite clear. The humans are, as far as we can tell, entirely individualistic beings. But... Zixtal's mandibles clicked rapidly in distress. How do they not destroy themselves? How do they make decisions? How do they function as a society? That's what we're here to find out, the captain replied, her iridescent scales shifting to a thoughtful shade of blue-green. The Council of Unified Species has tasked us with studying these anomalies. And I must say, their achievements are rather remarkable, considering their handicap. The bridge of the collective mind ship, harmonious unity, hummed with the synchronized thoughts of its crew, all except for the isolated pocket of confusion emanating from Zixtal's station. The massive observation vessel hung in high orbit above Earth, cloaked from both visual detection and radar, while its crew of xenoanthropologists and social scientists attempted to make sense of the bizarre civilization below. Perhaps, Zixtal ventured, they have some form of technological replacement? A neural network or quantum entanglement system that mimics the effects of a natural hive mind? Negative, came the chirping response from Communications Officer Perp, her feathers ruffling in amusement. They barely understand quantum mechanics, and their neural networks are primitive simulations at best. They literally just talk to each other, with sounds, or send electronic messages, one at a time. Like savages? Zixtal's horror was palpable. Oh, it gets better, Perp continued, clearly enjoying herself. They have multiple competing information networks, multiple governing bodies, multiple economic systems, multiple everything. And somehow it all sort of works, usually. Mostly. Well, sometimes. Captain Nurtique's scales shifted to a warning orange. Let's maintain scientific objectivity, shall we? Remember, the humans have achieved spaceflight, rudimentary AI, and global communication networks without the benefit of collective consciousness. That alone makes them worthy of serious study. Yes, but have you seen their entertainment broadcasts? Perp couldn't help herself. They create fictional scenarios where they fight themselves. Different groups of humans, fighting other groups of humans, over resources or beliefs, or sometimes just because they wrote slightly different instruction manuals for living. That's barbaric, Zixtal exclaimed. That's Thursday, Perp corrected, her feathers quivering with suppressed mirth. The captain's scales took on a distinct reddish tinge. Officers, please. We're here to observe and understand, not judge. Though I must admit, their method of technological advancement is unique. Unique? Zixtal had pulled up some historical data on his console. Captain, according to these records, they developed nuclear weapons before they had reliable spaceflight. They split the atom before they unified their planetary communication systems. That's not unique. That's insane. And yet, the captain mused, her scales shifting to a contemplative purple. They didn't destroy themselves. In fact, they used the threat of mutual destruction to maintain a sort of stability. Fascinating, really. Fascinating isn't the word I'd use, Zixtal muttered. Terrifying, maybe. How do they handle scientific research without collective peer review? How do they coordinate their planetary defense? How do they decide what to have for dinner? Actually, Perp interjected, they have this thing called restaurants, where different humans prepare food for other humans, and each human decides individually what to eat. Sometimes they even argue about it. Zixtal's antenna drooped in despair. That's so inefficient. How do they prevent resource waste? How do they optimize nutrition distribution? They don't! Perp was practically bouncing with excitement. Some of them eat too much, some eat too little, some eat things that aren't even good for them just because they enjoy the sensation. And don't even get me started on their mating practices. That's quite enough, Communications Officer, the captain interrupted firmly, her scales now a professional shade of gray. We need to focus on our primary mission, determining how these humans have managed to advance their civilization without collective consciousness, and whether they pose any threat to the Council of Unified Species. Threat? Zixtal's antenna shot straight up. Surely you're not serious, Captain. They can't even agree on basic planetary governance. That's precisely what makes them potentially dangerous, the captain explained. They're unpredictable. Their decision-making processes are, from our perspective, completely chaotic. They can go from fighting amongst themselves to uniting against an external threat with remarkable speed. They call it human nature, though none of them seem to agree on exactly what that means either. I've been monitoring their global information networks, Perp added, suddenly more serious. They have thousands of different theories about extraterrestrial life. Some of them would welcome us with open appendages. Others would attempt to destroy us on sight. Many would try to sell us something called a timeshare. But how do they decide which response to choose? Zixtal asked, genuinely puzzled. They don't decide collectively, the captain explained patiently. They would all react individually, then their various power structures would attempt to coordinate responses after the fact. It's like watching a swarm of insects respond to a threat, except each insect has its own opinions, goals, and favorite recreational activities. Speaking of which, Perp chirped, you won't believe what they do for fun. Focus, please, the captain interrupted. We need to compile our preliminary report for the council. They're particularly interested in understanding how humans handle large-scale projects without collective consciousness. Zixtal had been reviewing more data. Captain, according to these records, they built something called the International Space Station by having different groups of humans design and construct different sections, then launching them separately and assembling them in orbit, while competing with each other politically the entire time. Precisely. The captain's scales shifted to an admiring gold. They achieve remarkable things, not despite their lack of collective consciousness, but sometimes because of it. Their competitive nature drives innovation in unexpected ways. But it's so wasteful, Zixtal protested. Look at these efficiency metrics. They frequently develop the same technologies multiple times in different locations because they're not sharing information. And yet, Perp noted, that redundancy means their progress can't be easily halted. If one group fails, another often succeeds. They call it parallel development, though I don't think they plan it that way. It just happens. The captain's scales rippled with multiple colors as she considered this. Their entire civilization seems to operate on principles of controlled chaos. They have sayings like, 2 heads are better than 1, while simultaneously warning that too many cooks spoil the broth. They celebrate both individual achievement and team effort. They are walking, talking contradictions. How has this not driven them insane? Zixtal wondered aloud. Bold of you to assume it hasn't, Perp quipped. They have entire professions dedicated to helping them cope with their own consciousness. They call them therapists. And a sudden alarm cut through the conversation. Red warning lights pulsed across the bridge as the ship's sensors registered multiple launches from the planet's surface. Report! The captain barked, her scales flashing alert crimson. Multiple spacecraft detecting launching from different locations, Perp announced, her feathers slicking down in concentration. 3 from something called SpaceX, 2 from Blue Origin, 1 from NASA, 2 from ESA, and is that a private citizen with a homemade rocket? How did they detect us? Zixtal panicked. Our cloaking technology is perfect. They haven't, the captain realized, her scales shifting to amused pink. Check their trajectories. These launches were all planned independently. They're not coordinated at all. But they're all going to different destinations, Zixtal noted, examining the data. Some to orbit, some to their moon. One apparently attempting to reach something called Mars on a seriously questionable fuel budget. Welcome to humanity, Perp chirped cheerfully, where everyone has a different idea about space exploration and they're all trying it at once. The captain's scales settled into a thoughtful violet. Perhaps this is their greatest strength. They don't need to agree on a single path forward. They try everything, all at once, and somehow make progress through sheer stubborn determination and multiple redundant efforts. It's completely insane, Zixtal muttered. Yes, the captain agreed, but it works. Somehow it works. And that's what we need to understand. Because if they can achieve so much while working at cross purposes with themselves, imagine what they might accomplish if they ever did develop a true collective consciousness. The bridge fell silent as they contemplated this terrifying possibility. Should we warn the council? Zixtal asked nervously. Oh, it gets better, Perp announced, her feathers quivering with suppressed laughter. I just intercepted some of their scientific communications. Multiple groups are independently working on developing telepathic communication technology. Most of their scientists say it's impossible, but they're trying anyway. And at least one group is explicitly trying to create a technological hive mind. But that's... Zixtal's antenna twisted in knots. That's not how hive minds work. You can't just build one. Try telling them that, Perp chittered. They've got at least 30 different approaches they're attempting simultaneously. Most will fail, but they only need one to succeed, the captain finished, her scales now cycling through rapid patterns of concern and fascination. Officers, I believe we have enough for our preliminary report. The humans are chaotic, inefficient, contradictory, and possibly the most innovative species we've ever encountered precisely because they lack the natural constraints of a hive mind. What should we recommend to the council? Zixtal asked. The captain's scales settled into a decisive pattern. We recommend observation only. No contact. Let them develop naturally, because either they'll destroy themselves trying to achieve collective consciousness, or, Perp prompted, or they'll achieve it in some completely unexpected way that none of us could have predicted. And given their track record of doing the impossible through sheer bloody-minded determination and multiple simultaneous attempts, I wouldn't bet against them. Should we be worried? Zixtal asked. The captain's scales shifted through several thoughtful patterns before settling on a complex swirl of colors that somehow managed to convey both amusement and concern. About a species that speedran from splitting the atom to spaceflight while fighting itself the entire way? A species that turns its own internal contradictions into strengths? A species that responds to being told something is impossible by trying to do it several different ways at once? She paused for effect, her scales rippling with dark humor. We should be terrified, but also very, very glad they don't have a hive mind. Yet. Yet? Zixtal squeaked. Yet, the captain confirmed. Now, let's prepare that report, and perhaps suggest to the council that we start thinking about how to handle first contact with a species that might show up to the meeting in 5 different ships, each with their own agenda, all somehow working together while actively competing with each other. Is that even possible? Zixtal wondered. Officer. The captain's scales flickered with resignation and amusement. If there's one thing we've learned about humans, it's that they specialize in doing the impossible. Inefficiently, inconsistently, and inevitably. As if to punctuate her point, another alarm sounded. 3 more launches had just been detected from Earth's surface. One was apparently attempting to deliver ice cream to the International Space Station. Another seemed to be a privately funded mission to mine asteroids. The third was either a new telescope or a very ambitious pizza delivery service. The sensors couldn't quite tell. Just another day observing humanity, Perp chirped cheerfully. Should I start a betting pool on which launch actually achieves its objective? That would be unprofessional, the captain replied, her scales shifting to match the exact shade of blue used in human gambling establishments. Put me down for 50 credits on the ice cream mission. If there's one thing I've learned about humans, it's that they're at their most successful when they're doing something that seems completely ridiculous to everyone else. And somewhere below them, humanity continued its chaotic march toward the stars, blissfully unaware that their greatest strength might be their inability to agree on exactly how to get there. Captain, we may have a problem, Perp announced, her feathers bristling with concern. Remember that privately funded ice cream delivery mission to their space station? Captain Noratik's scales shifted to a cautious amber. The one I bet 50 credits on? What about it? Well, Perp's feathers rustled nervously. They succeeded. That's good news, isn't it? Zixtal ventured from his science station. Why do you sound worried? Because, Perp explained, they didn't just succeed. They accidentally invented a new type of propulsion system while trying to keep the ice cream from melting. Something about quantum-locked supercooled magnetic fields interacting with their fuel system in an unexpected way. They're calling it the Sunday Drive. The captain's scales cycled through several shades of disbelief before settling on a puzzled mauve. They invented new physics, by accident, while delivering frozen desserts? That's not even the weird part, Perp continued. 3 different human organizations are now arguing over who owns the patent. The ice cream company claims it's theirs because it was their mission. The rocket company says they own it because it was their propulsion system that malfunctioned in just the right way. And the space station crew is claiming partial ownership because they were the ones who noticed the anomaly and documented it. Let me guess. The captain's scales rippled with resignation. They're all going to try developing it separately now? 5 separate research programs have already been announced, Perp confirmed. Each with a different approach to replicating the effect. One of them is being funded entirely by something called Kickstarter, where random humans contribute small amounts of money in exchange for promises of future ice cream delivery to orbit. Zixtal's antenna drooped. This is not how scientific advancement is supposed to work. And yet, the captain mused, her scales shifting to a thoughtful blue. I suspect they'll have working prototypes before we finish our preliminary report to the council. Speaking of which, how is that coming along? About that, Zixtal clicked nervously. I've been analyzing their scientific method and, Captain, I don't think the council is going to believe this. Try me. The captain's scales flickered with interest. Well, they have this thing called peer review where other scientists actively try to prove each other wrong. They consider it a good thing when someone finds errors in their work. They have multiple competing theories about virtually everything, and instead of reaching consensus, they just keep arguing. Forever. Forever? The captain's scales showed skepticism. They're still debating some philosophical questions from thousands of years ago. Perp chipped in. Something about whether a ship is still the same ship if you replace all its parts. They turn everything into an argument, even their arguments about arguments. But somehow, Zixtal continued, his antenna twitching in confusion, this system produces results. They call it standing on the shoulders of giants. Though from what I can tell, it's more like a chaotic pyramid of humans stepping on each other's faces while shouting, "I told you so!" The captain was about to respond when another alarm sounded. Her scales flashed warning red. Now what? Perp's feathers flattened in disbelief. Remember that questionable Mars mission we spotted earlier? The one with insufficient fuel? Don't tell me they succeeded too, Zixtal groaned. Not exactly, Perp chirped. They ran out of fuel exactly as predicted. But then they posted their predicament on something called Reddit, and now there are 17 different proposed rescue missions being organized. 3 by official space agencies, 4 by private companies, and 10 by what appear to be random humans with access to garage workshops and too much free time. And the 17th? The captain asked, her scales showing morbid curiosity. That's the interesting one, Perp replied. A group of human teenagers who claim they can redirect the spacecraft using nothing but carefully timed explosions of something called Mentos and Diet Coke. They've already raised 2 million of their currency units through something called TikTok. The captain's scales cycled through several patterns before settling on a mixture of horror and admiration. Are they serious? That's the fascinating part about humans. Zixtal had been studying their behavior patterns. They appear to operate in a quantum state of simultaneous seriousness and absurdity. Their most ridiculous ideas are pursued with absolute dedication, while their most serious endeavors often involve what they call memes. Like their space program, Perp added enthusiastically. Did you know they have something called NASA Meme Guy, who explains complex astrophysics using pictures of cats? And it works! Humans actually learn better when the information is packaged with what they call stupid jokes. The captain's scales shifted to a deep purple of concentration. So let me understand this correctly. They have no hive mind, actively resist consensus, turn everything into a competition, solve serious problems with absurd solutions, and somehow this results in faster technological progress than any unified species we've encountered. Don't forget the ice cream, Perp reminded her. Apparently, they're now testing if different flavors affect the efficiency of the Sunday drive. Chocolate seems to produce 3% more thrust than vanilla. This is going to be a very interesting report to write, the captain mused, her scales showing a complex pattern that the ship's computer identified as professional existential crisis. How do we explain to the council that humanity's greatest strength is their complete inability to act like a rational, unified species? Actually, Zixtal had been doing more research. They have a word for this. Innovation through chaos. Though they also call it throwing everything at the wall and seeing what sticks. They've turned their complete lack of coordination into a methodology. And it works? The captain asked, though her scales suggested she already knew the answer. According to my calculations, Zixtal replied, his antenna straightening with reluctant admiration. Their chaotic approach to problem-solving is approximately 47% less efficient than our unified methods, but produces results 312% faster due to multiple simultaneous attempts and what they call happy accidents. Like the Sunday drive? Perp asked. Exactly. While a unified species would carefully plan and execute a single perfect approach, humans try everything at once, including several things that any rational being would dismiss as impossible. And since they don't share a hive mind, they can't talk themselves out of attempting the impossible. The captain's scales shifted to a contemplative gold. So their greatest weakness is actually... She was interrupted by yet another alarm. Oh, this is interesting, Perp announced, her feathers quivering with suppressed laughter. Remember those teenagers with the Mentos and Diet Coke plan? They just accidentally discovered a way to create controlled micro-wormholes. Apparently, the carbonation reaction in zero gravity, combined with the specific artificial sweeteners and mint catalysts, creates a temporary quantum tunneling effect. That's impossible, Zixtal protested. That's humanity, the captain corrected, her scales now showing a pattern that could only be described as amused resignation. Perp, add this to the report. Humanity's lack of a hive mind doesn't just allow them to survive despite their chaos. It allows them to weaponize that chaos into a form of progress that no unified species could ever achieve. Should I include the part about the Mentos? Perp asked. Especially the part about the Mentos, the captain confirmed. The Council needs to understand that humanity's greatest achievements often come from what they themselves call holding my beer and watch this. What's a beer? Zixtal asked. According to their records, Perp replied, it's a mildly poisonous recreational beverage that they invented before they figured out safe drinking water, which somehow led to the development of agricultural civilization, which eventually resulted in spaceflight. That's not a logical progression of events, Zixtal protested weakly. Welcome to humanity. The captain's scales showed a complex pattern of amusement and concern, where the path from point A to point B usually involves inventing point C through Z by accident, mostly while trying to make better snack foods. As if to prove her point, another alert sounded. The ice cream company had just announced a successful test of their improved Sunday drive, powered by a new flavor they called Quantum Ripple. Apparently, the sprinkles were essential to maintaining stable quantum fields. Should I update the betting pool? Perp asked cheerfully. Double my bet on the ice cream mission, the captain replied, her scales now showing a pattern that the ship's computer simply labeled as going native. And add a side bet that they'll achieve faster-than-light travel within a year, probably while trying to deliver hot pizza to Mars. Somewhere below them, humanity continued its chaotic march toward the impossible, one absurd achievement at a time. And in the vast darkness of space, other civilizations were about to learn a vital lesson. Never underestimate a species that treats the laws of physics like a casual suggestion and considers hold my beer a valid scientific methodology. Captain, Zixtal's antennae were practically tied in knots. I think we may have made a tactical error in our assessment of human capabilities. Captain Nurtik's scales shifted to concerned orange. Explain. Well, the science officer clicked nervously. Remember how we've been watching them accidentally discover revolutionary technologies while attempting mundane tasks? Like the Sunday drive and the Mentos wormholes? Perp chirped from her station. Those were fun. Did you know they're now selling Quantum Ripple ice cream in regular stores? Apparently it doesn't create propulsion fields at normal atmospheric pressure, but it does make your tongue tingle in 11 dimensions. That's actually part of the problem, Zixtal continued. I've been analyzing their media broadcasts and... Captain, I think they're doing it on purpose now. The captain's scales flashed skeptical purple. Doing what on purpose? Being chaotic! Zixtal pulled up several data streams. Look at these recent project announcements. Revolutionary new battery technology discovered during failed attempt to create better coffee maker. Teleportation breakthrough achieved by gaming stream gone wrong. Time dilation effect generated by TikTok dance challenge. Those sound like normal human achievements to me, the captain noted, her scales showing mild confusion. Exactly. Zixtal's antenna quivered with anxiety. They've noticed the pattern. They're intentionally creating situations of maximum chaos in hopes of stumbling upon new scientific principles. They're weaponizing their own randomness. Perp's feathers ruffled with amusement. Is that even possible? They're calling it strategic disorder theory, Zixtal explained. The basic premise is that since their greatest discoveries seem to come from unlikely accidents, they should intentionally create more unlikely accidents. They're industrializing serendipity. The captain's scales cycled through several thoughtful patterns. And this is working? That's the terrifying part. Zixtal brought up more data. They've started funding what they call chaos labs, where they deliberately combine unlikely elements in hopes of causing beneficial accidents. One facility is just a room full of college students with energy drinks and random equipment. Their productivity rate is unprecedented. Oh. Perp's feathers perked up. Is that the one that accidentally created artificial gravity while trying to make the perfect grilled cheese sandwich? The same, Zixtal confirmed. Apparently, the interaction between melted cheese proteins and their energy drink altered brainwaves generated a localized gravitational anomaly. They're calling it the grilled cheese gravity well. 3 different space agencies are now running competitive programs to recreate the effect, each using different types of cheese. The captain's scales showed a complex pattern of concern and curiosity, so they've essentially turned their lack of a hive mind into a feature, not a bug, Perp finished cheerfully. They're calling it distributed chaos theory. The idea is that by having multiple independent groups working on deliberately unlikely projects, they maximize their chances of useful accidents. It's like they've turned the scientific method inside out. Captain, Zixtal's antenna drooped with worry. This changes everything. We thought their chaos was a natural consequence of their individualistic nature. But if they're learning to control it, to direct it, then they're even more unpredictable than we thought, the captain finished, her scales now showing a pattern that the ship's computer labeled as existential dread with a side of fascination. Another alert sounded across the bridge. Oh, this is interesting, Perp announced, her feathers quivering with barely contained laughter. Remember those teenagers who discovered wormholes with Mentos? They just started a startup company called Quantum Fizz Industries. Their first project is attempting to create stable micro-universes inside soap bubbles. And they've already got funding from something called Silicon Valley. But that's... Zixtal's antenna twisted in confusion. That's not how universe creation works. You can't just... They've already done it, Perp interrupted. Twice. By accident. While trying to film something called a YouTube unboxing video. Apparently, the quantum foam properties of dish soap, when combined with carbonated quantum tunneling effects and something called subscriber hype, can actually punch small holes in reality. The captain's scales shifted through several previously unrecorded patterns before settling on a complex swirl that seemed to represent both professional concern and clinical amusement. Add this to the report. Humanity has not only embraced their chaotic nature, but has developed a methodology to weaponize it. They are now intentionally creating conditions for impossible accidents to occur, then reverse engineering the results. Should we be worried? Zixtal asked. About a species that's turned their greatest weakness into a scientific methodology? The captain's scales flickered thoughtfully. A species that's now intentionally creating chaos in hopes of discovering new laws of physics? A species that responds to accidental discoveries by immediately trying to replicate them in the most unlikely ways possible? She paused, her scales showing a pattern that suggested she was trying not to laugh. We should be terrified, but also incredibly impressed. They've basically turned hold my beer and watch this into a legitimate research methodology. Another alert sounded. Speaking of which, Perp announced, the grilled cheese gravity well team just accidentally discovered a way to manipulate dark matter. Something about lactose intolerance creating quantum resonance patterns in parallel dimensions. They're calling it string cheese theory. Of course they are. The captain's scales showed resigned amusement. Update the report. Add a new section. Humanity's intentional exploitation of chaos as a research tool. And maybe suggest to the Council that we should start considering the possibility that humans aren't just surviving despite their lack of a hive mind. They're actively using their individualistic chaos as a form of distributed quantum computation. Through cheese? Zixtal asked weakly. Through cheese, ice cream, carbonated beverages, and whatever else they decide to experiment with next, the captain confirmed. At this point, I wouldn't be surprised if they achieved universal enlightenment through a particularly spicy taco. As if on cue, another alert sounded. Perp's feathers all stood on end as she read the notification. Captain, she said carefully, you may want to sit down for this one. A food truck in something called Austin, Texas, just accidentally opened a communication channel with a higher plane of existence. Apparently, their new hot sauce recipe, combined with something called a breakfast taco, created a temporary breach in the consciousness barrier between dimensions. The captain's scales cycled through every known color before settling on a shade that could only be described as hysterical acceptance. Add it to the report. she sighed, and start a new betting pool on what they'll discover next. Though at this point, I think we should just assume that anything we consider impossible will be accidentally discovered by humans within the next few months, probably while they're trying to make better snack foods. Somewhere below them, humanity continued its now intentionally chaotic march toward the future, turning their greatest weakness into their greatest strength, one improbable accident at a time. And in the vast darkness of space, the Council of Unified Species was about to receive a report that would fundamentally change their understanding of progress,